Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Dr. Emra Bulsonar, and we're going to be talking about the Industrial Revolution. So how are you doing, Emra?
I am fine, thank you. How are you, Lipton?
I'm great. I was online doing research and I saw the title and was immediately impressed because I like to study the Industrial Revolution, the Great
Mm,
Divergence. That's
yes,
one of my hobbies. I love to study that topic. And
yes,
your thesis is quite innovative. You're arguing that the British elite did not block innovations during the Industrial Revolution.
yes.
And at the time that was unusual because elites often block innovations to protect their status. But before we delve into your paper, Emerald, what influenced your research?
Well, many economic historians, actually, the economic historians who specifically focus on political matters and the political intersection of politics, economics, and also history. I can give a couple of examples, of course. For example, Joel Mokyr influenced me a lot, and also Deirdre McCloskey. You also mentioned a great divergence, right? He is not exactly an economic historian, but also he's also great influence. Daron Acemoglu, also another influence on me. So these kind of economic historians influenced me a lot on my research in general, I can say.
Emerald, were British elites more entrepreneurial than average? This is a question I've been
Mm,
asking for some time now. Some years ago, I saw an article written by
mhm,
this economic historian, and he was arguing that British elites were a bit entrepreneurial. We know that in England, elites
mm,
were
mm.
involved in innovation, but compared to other countries in Europe, were they actually more entrepreneurial? Have you seen this anywhere in the literature? Or it is
Well,
just a conjecture?
Well, it is not my in my paper. It is not
Yeah.
exactly my argument, but I am pretty aware those kind of arguments. And my observation is that I can only say my observation about it. I think it is correct. I mean, British entrepreneurs are more active compared to other countries, other Western countries. So this is one of the reasons why Industrial Revolution first happened in Britain, but not in other countries. This is one of the biggest question of field of economic history. Why Britain was the first country that industrial revolution took place? Why it was not in another European country, or why it was not in other parts of world? For example, in China or in Islamic world. So one of the explanations is that, well, this British entrepreneurship was more developed compared to other countries, which is also my observation in that direction. But also then the question is that why British entrepreneurs was more developed compared to other countries, then we have to discuss about other factors. And there is a quite vibrant and vibrant discussion in the literature about why British entrepreneurs were more developed compared to other countries in Britain. Different kinds of economic historians explained it in a different way. Some economic historians say that, well, it was the institutions. Some others say that, well, it was the international competition. Some others say that, well, it was the innovation and technology and other factors or culture. And some economic historians like Gregory Clark, he interrelates this development of entrepreneurs with some demographic and gene related factors. And there are this debate is still going on, and there is not a very clear explanations about it. But my impression, my side is that I can say that the institutions was the I think the biggest factor, especially, but not just the formal institutions, but also the informal institutions in Britain. What made the Britain different from other countries?
Exactly. Emra, list some of the arguments that are frequently invoked to explain why British elites did not block innovation.
Mm,
So, in your first paragraph,
mm,
you highlighted some of these arguments
yes.
relating to international competitiveness, etc.
Yeah. Yes. 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 Well, there are different kinds of explanations why British ruling elite did not block Industrial Revolution, because it was likely. My main argument in the my main point in my introduction is that it was likely. It was, I mean, from today's perspective, it is considered taken for granted, right? British ruling elite did not block Industrial Revolution. Then from today's perspective, we can say that, well, why would they? Why would they? But it was possible. First, I explained this, why it was possible that a British ruling elite could have blocked the Industrial Revolution, because it happened in other countries and in England as well. In England's history, there are many incidents that British ruling elite, afraid from the social disturbances, and they say that, well, okay, I am preventing this mechanization. No more this mechanization, not at all. In 16th century, in 17th century, there are these kind of decrees, okay? The king or parliament just ban, they just prohibit the machinery and different kinds of gadgets and the innovations. But in 18th century, they didn't behave in that way. Then the question is why? The literature already gives some answers to them, but they are not sufficient. Some economic historians says that it was the economic rents. Well, during 18th century, economic rents were increasing, so there was an increasing industrial class. So the political class also wanted to get its share. So political class, mainly the aristocrats, was already benefiting from expanding economy. So that's why they didn't prevent the Industrial Revolution. The second explanation is that it was the political power, especially Doran Asamoglu and other economists and economic historians emphasize this factor. And they say that, well, they didn't prevent Industrial Revolution because it was not a threat to their political power anyway. So why would they? And the third explanation is that, which I emphasize in my conclusion, international competition. There was fierce international competition in Western Europe, especially between Britain and France, and in other Western European countries, to a certain extent, Spain and other countries. So Britain wanted to keep its competitiveness. So that's why the political elite did not prevent Industrial Revolution. So I thought that I searched and reviewed these explanations, and I noticed that these explanations does not depend on first-hand sources or any kind of clear evidence. Evidence was weak. It was mostly depending on interpretation of some historical events, or it was depending on some theoretical perspectives. Then I thought that, well, what if I just delve into the closely examine the first-hand sources of parliament and try to understand the mindset of the British ruling elite, what kind of explanation I could get. This is the main idea behind my paper. I mean, which kind of argument I would come up with? Would it support the first explanation, the second explanation, or third explanation? So this was the main idea behind my research question in the paper.
Yes. And during the publication of your paper, you paid significant attention to the cotton industry. Could you tell us why
Yes.
the cotton industry was important?
Yes, it is the main industry the Industrial Revolution first started. That was the main reason why I focus on cotton industry, because the productivity gains and mechanization first started in cotton industry, then it diffused to other textile industries, and then diffused to other sectors. So, well, I needed to narrow down the topic to make the paper more manageable, more focusable. So I needed to focus, it was not possible for me to focus on all industries, all Industrial Revolution industries. It was not possible. So I need to pick one. So I choose the one that was representative for all industries. So it was mainly the cotton industry. As I say, the mechanization first started in that industry. If I can understand the reaction of political elite to the cotton industry, then I decided that I can generalize this reaction to the other industries as well.
Emerald, were protectionist policies prominent during this era? And we're referring to the 18th century, the 1760s, etc.
Yes, it was very dominant. And not just at the first half of the 18th century, also at the second half of the 18th century. The protectionist policies was very, very dominant. There are some economic historical research that arguing that at the second half of the 18th century, the market economy and liberal economy was more dominant, but it was not exactly correct. I mean, even at the second half of the 18th century, the political elite was still thinking in the direction of mercantilism and protectionism. So their main motivation and urge related to the cotton industry was mostly protections. They try to protect cotton industry from the competition of other industries. At the first half of the 18th century, British ruling elite tried to protect the cotton, its textile industry, mainly from Asian competition, especially Indian clothes and Indian textile industry. But at the second half of the 18th century, especially French competition and Irish competition was the main problem for the British ruling elite. So they tried to protect their industry from the rivalry of French textile industry. In those times, what I observed that there were some open and liberal policy mindset. I mean, some MPs, some member of the political elite suggesting liberal economic policies, but these were mostly secondary. Main mindset was mostly protectionist. So they tried to protect the cotton industry. But I also should note that it is not definite that this protectionist trade policy really worked or not. We don't know about that. I mean, what I am interested in the paper is that they intend to protect the cotton industry. They implemented protectionist policies, but in the end, whether these policies become beneficial for the cotton industry or not, we don't know about that exactly. And this is not the main question I am asking in the paper.
All right. I know this is a fascinating debate. Some argue that liberalism conduced growth in Britain, whereas others say that no, the British were protectionist. That's why I
Yes.
posed the question.
At the beginning, it was all protectionist. Until 1820s, there was no liberal policies almost at all. Only after 1820s, they started to implement liberal policies. It is a myth. It is a myth that Britain started to grow with liberal policies. This is not correct. Britain started to grow totally with protectionist policies. After they reached a certain level of development, then they shifted gradually to the liberal policies.
Emra, who were the Luddites?
Luddites, yes. They are the most famous. They were the most famous technologically conservative groups. As I said, Industrial Revolution started in the cotton industry, which means that mechanization first started in the cotton industry. Mechanization means that machinery is doing the job, not the regular and ordinary workers anymore. So the business owners did not need 30, 60, or 100 workers anymore. They can do the same job with one machine and maximum 10 workers, okay? Which means that many workers are jobless now. So they got some education and they had some skills in textile industry, and those skills are not important anymore. So they were jobless. So these people, after a certain point, just started to react to the machines. They thought that, well, these machines are stealing our jobs, so we have to do something about it. So they organized, they formed an organization, and they started to be called as Luddites after a certain point, and they started to attack to the factories, to the machineries. They broke them. Technically, they fired them, broke them, they attacked them. So these people called as Luddites in 1810s, machine breakers, technically.
And were they successful in their attempts to undermine industry?
No, they were not successful, fortunately, because if they were successful, then Industrial Revolution wouldn't have been at all, probably. They tried to stop, actually, the mechanization process, and they tried to stop the Industrial Revolution without being aware of it. So Parliament and British ruling elite did not compromise them. And this was one of the reasons why Industrial Revolution happened and occurred. Because if Luddites was trying to eliminate, destroy the machinery altogether, and if they were successful, there wouldn't be any Industrial Revolution at all. But British parliamentary elite, ruling elite, was aware that this machinery is important. It is important for economic growth and economic productivity. So they were quite enlightened about this issue, and they were aware that these Luddite people, ordinary workers, were not aware of the benefits of the machinery. British ruling elite was aware that, well, this machinery can create some unemployment in the short term, but in the long term, they will be beneficial to our economy, and even they will create more jobs. But the ordinary people is not aware of this. So even if they riot against the government, they started protests and even rebellions against the government. We need to crush it. We need to oppress it for the sake of the country and for the sake of the economy. And they did it in that way. They reject the demands of Luddites, reject the demands of technologically conservative groups, and they protected the machinery. And this was one of the reasons how Industrial Revolution occurred. Because as I say, if they didn't, then potentially there was no space and there was no place for the mechanization to grow.
Emra, when you say the ruling elite in your article, are you referring to the parliamentary elite or the entrepreneurial elite?
No, what I mean is not entrepreneurial elite at all. It is the political elite,
yes,
which means that the members of parliament, technically, and especially the ministers, prime minister, and other ministers, and parliamentary members. These parliamentary members can be MPs if they are in the House of Commons, and they can be peers if they are in the House of the Lords. And I don't, in my paper, I don't pay any attention to the economic elite. That's a different story.
yes.
My focus is what is the reaction of political elite, the people who decide on political matters. Prime minister, ministers, MPs, and peers.
Okay. Emra, did the parliamentary elite enable the entrepreneurial elite? In other words, did they have a close relationship with entrepreneurial elites? Because I read your article, and in one of the essays, you note that the parliamentary elite did not have a close relationship with the entrepreneurial elite. So I'm wondering if this explains why parliamentary elites did not succumb to lobbying, because they were not dependent on the support of entrepreneurial elites.
Yes, that's a very good question, actually. For this reason, I specifically searched who were the people who spoke on cotton industry in parliament, and who were the people who decide on the things about the cotton industry within political elite. And I found that certain part of the ruling elite who decides on cotton industry was also economic elite. So these were the same people. These were the business people and wealth owners and people who owns textile factories. These were also within parliament. There were people like both MP and also textile industries. There were quite a few people within this profile. But I also noticed that majority of the people who decide on the matters on cotton industry was not within this group. These people were minority. If these people were majority, we will think that, well, then there is a clear influence of entrepreneurs on parliament. So they just deciding on things whatever they want to. But this was not exactly the case. Many decision makers and the prime minister, ministers, and other important figures related to cotton industry, they were not affiliated with cotton industry at all. They were doing this, they were taking these decisions with public motivations. For example, increasing the international competitiveness of British economy, or they were doing this with the motivation of decreasing unemployment. They were taking these decisions with public motivations, not with private interest. As I say, there were some people who acted with public interest, but they were not majority. They were not the main decision maker. So we cannot say that, well, entrepreneurs were just influencing parliament and they were just making parliament to take any decision they wanted. This was not the case at all. What I notice is that parliament, most of the time, quite objective and acted like arbiter among different interests of industrialists and merchants. So parliament was like a place like everybody was demanding something. Okay, just give me this, just give me that. All industrialists, merchants, all sectors, every day they were just giving petitions and they are demanding something about something. So they were, most of the time, these interests were conflicting with each other. Okay. So what parliament was doing is that just reconciling these conflicting interests. And what I noticed is that they were not under the influence of one or another clique, one or another interest groups. They just acted like quite objective, and they just acted like whatever is correct for the country and for the people.
Emra, is there a difference between manufacturing and industrialization? Some of us do think that manufacturing is a part of the industrial process, because in your article, you note that the elites didn't fear undermining the manufacturing sector, but blocking industrialization was never a part of the question. But isn't manufacturing a part of the industrial process?
Well, it is actually the more or less same thing. It kind of depends on how you use them. I use them quite interchangeably in my paper. Okay, but what in the point that you just mentioned, I just can you hear me, Lipton?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, yes.
All right. Okay, in that point that you just mentioned, what I try to say is that, well, there were certain decisions of parliamentary elite which was undermining manufacturing sector. Okay, because ruling elite, mostly the landed class before 1832. So there were many incidents that they were prioritizing the landed interest over manufacturing interest. For example, typical example is Corn Law. Corn Law was a typical example of how Parliament was prioritized landed interest over manufacturing interest. But despite this situation, despite their prioritizing of landed interest, they never thought to block industrialization altogether. They were satisfied with the development and industrialization, but also they didn't want to landed interest to sacrifice the manufacturing sector. So they try to find some kind of balance about it, and their balance was not always beneficial to manufacturing sector. This was correct, but even if this was the case, they did not intend to block technological and industrial development altogether at all. So this is my main point in the paper.
Emra, these parliamentary elites appear to be quite enlightened. How did
Yes.
they know that industrialization was going to reduce poverty? Even today, when people hear that
Yeah.
technology will be incorporated, they assume that it will lead to higher rates of unemployment when the ATM actually increased employment. So these people, why were they so forward thinking? How did they know?
Well, it's I think very good question, Lipton. First of all, even British ruling elite was not aware that they were within something called as industrial revolution at all. I mean, it was not possible for them to know that. Of course, they were observing technological improvements. They were observing the productivity gains in certain sectors, but they didn't know that in the future, in the long term, this will turn out some kind of industrial revolution at all. They were not aware of it. But they were aware that these technological improvements were beneficial somehow. Maybe not as like industrial revolution or something similar, but somehow they were beneficial. How? As I say, they were aware that even in the short term, these technological developments create unemployment. In the midterm or in the long term, they will create more jobs. They will create more economic growth. They were aware of it, and also they afraid that, well, if you ban these technological improvements, some other countries can use it, and they can get ahead of us. Okay, they can undermine us in that way, especially France. British ruling elite was really afraid that the France can catch up Britain, and they can be more powerful and economically and militarily, etc. So this was the main motivation of British ruling elite. They afraid that these technological improvements can be used from other countries, so they can be more powerful than us. They can be more richer than us. And also they were aware that, well, okay, these ordinary people just opposing to these technological improvements, but in the short, maybe in the short run, but in the long run, they will understand the benefits. So you can also ask that how they knew that. Well, we can give many. I mean, it is not in my paper. I am not trying to explain in my paper why British ruling elite was so enlightened. This is another question. And Joel Mokyr actually wrote about this question. And we can give many answers about it, but we know that there was quite an economic literature in second half of the 18th century, right? Adam Smith was one of the most important economists who wrote at the second half of the 18th century. So, for example, one of the most influential figure at the second half of the 18th century within political elite, they were aware of the Adam Smith. They were referencing to Adam Smith, so they were quite knowledgeable about economic issues. So that was one of the reasons
I
why.
like this
Yeah,
theory.
yeah,
I like this theory because it's evident that not just in England, but also in continental Europe, that European elites were familiar with political and economic philosophy, and they
yeah,
were also aware of the concept of good governance. Rent
yes, yeah,
seeking declined in Europe eventually, what people refer to as old corruption.
yeah, yeah.
And in
That's
your
correct.
article, you said that that rent seeking was not excessive. Cronyism, that's the term that you use.
Yes,
Cronyism was
yes,
not excessive.
yes. That's correct. Yes, yes. There was of course some chronism, but it did not reach to the level of just blocking the industrial and technological development altogether. There was a very good article about it. Actually, it was comparing chronism in France and chronism in Britain, and it was arguing that in France, certain clans, certain groups were very powerful and they were very influential on the king. But in Britain, it was opposite. There was not any specific interest group or other which was very influential on the political system. So the political system could act like an arbiter among different kinds of interests. it didn't mean that there was no corruption at all, by the way. British political system was also quite corrupt, but it was also functioning to the extent that there was no block on the industrial and technological development.
Before the Industrial Revolution, there was a revolution in governance then. There was a good governance revolution. Well, I know that there's a paper on parliament and economic growth in Europe, but I've never seen one on good governance and growth before the Industrial Revolution or during the Industrial Revolution.
Yes, yes. Maybe it can also, I am just suggesting that as an hypothesis, but it can also relate it with the British. British elite was quite knowledgeable about many things. Aristocratic elite, they were reading a lot, they were just sharing different kinds of ideas. And well, this elitism might be, I mean, from today's perspective, elitism is considered something bad, right? Democracy
Not
is
from my
considered
perspective.
yeah, okay, yeah. But from those kind of perspective, elitism might be good actually, because well, for example, the ordinary people demanded to stop mechanization, block mechanization, but the elite people say that no, we cannot do that. So that's how industrial revolution happened. So elitism was beneficial in that time, and the elitist people were more knowledgeable. They know how to govern. They know about good governance. They knew about economic growth, etc. But ordinary people didn't know all those things at all. So this can be one of the factors behind the industrial revolution and why British political elite was enlightened.
Elites are crucial to growth. They have the human capital and the financial resources, and they're usually the innovators.
Yes.
What
They are
Joel
like the
Mokyr,
locomotive.
yes,
I mean this. Yes.
what Joel
Precursor.
Mokyr
Yes.
calls upper tail human capital.
Yes.
And there are some newer studies on Sweden and Denmark, different studies highlighting the importance of elites to growth. So that factor cannot be discounted. That's why I said I am not anti-elite.
Yeah, yes, I agree with you, definitely. I mean, this my paper also supports this idea. The role of elite was very, very crucial in important turning points. So yeah, I agree. Even today, in the development of countries, elite play a very important role, and the exact opposite is populism, and populism can cause quite bad things. I mean, it may seem good at the beginning, populism, but in the end, most of the time it does not end well.
Yeah, usually not all the time, but usually populists are protectionist, and protectionism doesn't lead to economic growth.
Yes, that's correct. It
So
reduces.
you mentioned earlier that the British economy in the early industrial era was protectionist, but even without protectionism, the economy might have grown, because in America, the non-tariff sectors still experience growth. So it might have been a correlation rather than a causation.
Yeah, I agree. But it is, I mean, there is no way that an economy, a national economy, can be full open. But protectionism is also something bad for economic growth. So it is important for countries find a correct balance between protectionism and open economy. And it seems like the British ruling elite find that optimal balance between protectionism and liberalization in late 18th century and early 19th century. First, they started with protectionist policies, and then gradually, when they felt confident about their economy, then gradually they started to impose liberal policies. But for example, if you just liberate your economy before, if you just implement liberal trade policies before your economy reached a certain level of development, this can also be harmful. And this is a typical example for this is 19th century Ottoman Empire. In that time, British advised a lot the Ottoman state that it just implement liberal policies. Liberalism is good, but the Ottoman industry was not very developed at all. So it turned out that, well, all the European and British goods flock into the Ottoman markets, and this actually harmed the development of Ottoman industry in the end. So protectionist policies can also be important, but it is important where you use them.
Yes. And you're from Sweden, right?
Yes. At the moment, yeah.
Yes, Sweden is a
I'm
peculiar.
not Swedish, by the way. I am Turkish, but I live in Sweden.
Yeah, you don't sound Swedish. You're from Turkey.
Yes,
Great.
yes.
This is the first time I've interviewed somebody from Turkey.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. I plan to interview more. So, but also you're not Swedish. You're from Turkey. I was reading some articles on the Ottoman Empire recently, mostly dealing with slavery.
Yes, yeah.
Mostly dealing with slavery in the Ottoman
Yeah,
Empire.
there is, I know very good about the history of slavery in Ottoman Empire. Yes.
Was there a noble class in the Ottoman Empire? Did they have an official noble class?
There was only one noble class. There was no aristocracy in Ottoman Empire. Only one noble class. It was the ruling dynasty, Ottomans.
Yes.
Ottoman dynasty was the only dynasty, and there was no any other noble family in the empire.
Yes.
It was quite centralized in that way. I mean, it is different than the European social structure. In Europe, there is one dynasty, and there are also other noble families, right? They are also important. But in Ottoman Empire, there was only one dynasty ruling country, and there is no any other noble families at all. There is no aristocracy class.
Yes. And was there a permanent elite class outside of the Ottoman ruling family?
There was a bureaucratic class actually affiliated with the Ottoman.
What class?
Bureaucratic
Okay.
class. They were affiliated with the Ottoman dynasty. Ottoman social structure, like there was state, dynasty, and the affiliated bureaucratic elite, and the rest of people. It was like in that way.
Okay. Well, I'm from Jamaica, a former British colony.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I'm from. So I really like economic history. I think that even today, countries can learn much from the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, I
because
agree.
it shows us what can work and what is not likely to work. And countries don't develop without acquiring human capital. So Mariana Mazzucato, she's really popular, and she has rejuvenated the idea of industrial policy. I agree with her research on small businesses. Most small businesses are inefficient and they don't promote innovation, but I'm not in favor of industrial policy. But the Gleaner, the leading daily in Jamaica, has been touting industrial policy, and I don't think that is going to work for us.
No, that's great.
We have less than 1 minute left, so I have to go. We have to wrap up.
Okay.
But speaking to you has been a pleasure. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Have a nice day.